So we have two extremely special guests this evening here to welcome you to the film. All the way from Montreal, we have the director, Emmanuel Hoss-Demarais, and the star of the film are one of our favorite Texas actors, Thomas Haden Church, in attendance. So come on down, Emmanuel and Thomas. And I'd just like to say this has been an incredible debut for Emmanuel, who is the director. He won a special award at Tribeca for this, his first feature film, and then won several awards from the Canadian Academy for the film that you're about to see. So we are honored to have you here tonight. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm really proud to, and like you were saying, Holly, this is a very funny time to watch such a cold film. I hope you won't suffer as much as we did making the film. But I'll let Tom give his thoughts on.
Well, we are going to have a Q&A after the movie, so anybody that, after the crowd diminishes to the appreciative 6 or 7 of you, you'll be welcome to ask us several questions each. So that you don't have to limit it 3-5 questions per person. Just fire away. And but thank you so much. I can't remember the last time I was here. I think it was a Sideways fundraiser or something. Oh, it was Killer Joe. Yeah, thank you so much for turning out. Big fan of the Austin Film Society. Try to support it as much as I can and enjoy Whitewash. It's a breezy cold winter in Quebec.
We'll be back in an hour and a half.
No, but I do want to talk a little bit about, you're Canadian, winter is tough, and yet this movie. So can you talk a little bit about the origins of the story and also just making that big decision to go out in the winter and with a bunch of cameras and your actor?
Actually, a few things brought in the film. The co-writer and I were writing a really complex story that had many characters in a big family epic film, and then we just thought we had read an article, and this happens every winter. Some guy gets hit by a snowplow driver, some drunk driver, and so we just started with that idea, and then started to develop. See how can this be a story? And we started thinking about hermits that live a lot in Russia. We realized there were a lot of in the Ukraine and in Russia hermits that just end up spending their whole lives hidden away in the deep cold. And we thought, how can people end up that way? And then so we kind of brought this story about a man who runs over another guy and hides in the forest and ends up being a hermit. So that's how the whole thing was constructed.
And Thomas, you didn't run in fear when you saw that the script was going to land squarely on your shoulders.
I just want to mention also that the people, we were standing back there, and as soon as the credits were rolling, people that were going past me were all apologizing for leaving. So that's very, very Austin, very polite. And like, a great movie, but I gotta pee really bad, dude. I gotta get out.
That's actually very Canadian to be very polite. So.
No, I didn't. When I read it, it just immediately, it was like, what an amazing character study. And the complexity of the guy, because when it was sent to me, they were like, hey, it's a really dark comedy. And yet when I read it, it just seemed like a very complex, dramatic study of this guy's circumstances, most of which are self-imposed. And when Manny and I first started talking about it, which was at the beginning of 2012, he was like, well, what did you think? Would the comedy part appeal to you or what? I said, I don't, it's just a human experience. I couldn't really separate him from one moment to the next. He does some things that are obviously more comedic, but it all was completely embedded in this guy just trying to survive. And the most ridiculous aspects, Manny was just in Beijing at a film festival, and he said that when I turn the beer over and it's frozen, that he said the Chinese are like, yeah. So you never know what's going, and it's pure desperation.
That's not how I told the story, but you tell it way better than I do. Way better than I do.
But I think the tone is really fearless, and especially to the American audience, we don't get so many Canadian films. I know there are a lot of Canadian dark comedies, but this this tone that sort of vacillates between the very, very dark and also not being afraid to have Thomas's character be very funny. Can you talk about, did you have inspirations for that, or what was your approach with knowing you were going to balance these two things?
Right, and I think a lot of people talk about the tone of the film, and a lot of people see it as its strength, and a lot of people see it as its weakness, and I think the one thing I'm happy about being my first film is at least I didn't ask myself that many questions, and I'm realizing it now how lucky we were during the process. We had these great producers who, their last two films had been nominated for at the Oscars. They had done Incendie and Monsieur Lazare and some great films, and so they had a lot of trust from the Canadian film funds, because as you may not know, we're really lucky. We have a commie film system in Canada where
Good stuff.
Our taxpayers pay for culture and film, and so this film was funded with our taxpayers' money, and so we had a lot of confidence from the producers, and then Tom came aboard, and I realized with today that we were very lucky to ask ourselves very little questions and only function on instinct. And so Tom and I, we'd be talking about a scene. We're two jokers. We like to laugh and joke around, but we never asked ourselves, okay, let's try to be funny in this moment, or let's try to be serious. It's just, what's the story? What's happening? And so if he's got to have a smoke with the jerry cans as he's pulling them in with the, what do you call them? The gas cans when he's pulling them. If he's got to smoke, he's got to smoke. And so a lot of the humor came from the character, and it was all instinctive in terms of tone. There was, but to come back to your question, obviously, I mean, there have been some great influences, and I think the Coen brothers were obviously, a great influence, and not necessarily Fargo. Everyone talks about Fargo because it is a winter film, but I think No Country for Old Men, that was the film that I guess from the Coen brothers that inspired me the most for this specific film.
Shot in Texas. No country. Any questions from the audience? Yes, right here.
Why did you choose not to have much backstory for the character who was suicidal?
So the question is, why did you choose not to have so much backstory for the suicidal character? And maybe you can also fill us in on that actor, because I know he's a real big deal.
Right.
Paul.
Right. And a lot of people wonder if we cut out a lot in the editing, and no, we practically wrote it this way. And, it was very important for Mark and I, the co-writer, that we make a movie about one man and his redemption and his struggle with guilt. And the more we wrote backstory and the more we developed the second character, the less it became about his journey. And so we really, there was a point we actually wrote a draft where we cut away all flashbacks and cut away all the why, who was the man he killed, and we actually tried to develop more into the present time, and we realized that that was not the avenue we wanted to take. So we just landed on this balance where we would just give tiny hints as the movie went along, just tiny hints about what their past was, and just have fun in how we could tell those flashbacks. But we didn't want to give more. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but yeah. And then Paul, Marc Labrèche, he's a very funny guy. He's a comedian, mainly known for his television work in Canada, in French Canada. So he rarely goes into these darker, weirder roles. So it was fun to cast him in that kind of a role.
Yes, right here.
This one's for Tom. Did you do anything in particular to physically, mentally, or emotionally prepare for your role?
So how did you prepare for your role physically and mentally?
There was something that happened in my personal life immediately before I went to start the movie, and Manny and the production team were kind enough to actually adjust the very beginning of the schedule. I had somebody that was very close to me that passed away in such a sudden fashion that I actually considered not doing the movie and being with the family, and you know, I talked to Manny about it, and Manny was so considerate, and he said, "Look, dude, at this point," and he and I had been working together at that point on the script for about a month. He said, "Honestly, I can't imagine doing the movie without you, and we'll wait. You know, you just do what you need to do." But it was a very devastating event, and when I got there, it's just I just had to crawl sort of back in to the emotional core, which doesn't sound like a very like prepared actor way to explain it. It's sort of in retrograde as to how I got to it. But the thing that was very important to me, and Manny and I discussed it after whenever we were shooting, was the death of the wife, and how we just really wanted to drop in the tiniest elements of that. But that there was a very specific tragic event that caused Bruce to start sliding down that slope. And to me, what was always fascinating, the complexity of the relationship between Bruce and Paul. These guys actually arrive in each other's lives, and you think for a moment, wow, this is salvation. This guy's going to help me redeem myself. And they both sort of, I think, share that. But then you have a guy that is trying to commit suicide, and literally 3 or 4 days later, I kill him. You know, it's the most sort of mind-bending irony that I stopped something that was inevitable in his life. One way or another, this guy was going to die ugly, and all I did was just, I put it off for a few days. But to answer your question, it really was a tragedy that sort of prepared me for it. And to go right into the movie was a remarkable experience, and did really help me, without sounding so cliche. But it really did help me sort of move past something in the immediacy of it. And then when I got back to Texas, you know, I had to deal with it. But it was a very unique experience to have. And it's why Whitewash is very special to me. And it's been reflected in a lot of people, in a lot of the people that understand the movie. I think they do appreciate the emotional specificity of what was going on with the dude. There's a scene in particular when I'm in the snowplow alone, and you know, Bruce goes through these almost absurd pantomimed interviews. You know, there's one in the cave when I'm blaming the plow. You know, it's my co-conspirator. But there was another one where, and Manny and I talked about it, where I start to imagine, like you just asked, the backstory of Paul's career, not his career, his life. You know, Bruce starts to sort of wander off into who he is and who he was and what I don't know about him, and the horrors that I may have actually committed upon this man's family. And it was a very touchstone moment for me that I knew I'm completely embedded in this character, completely. And Manny did something that was completely unique in 25 years of acting, and I'll let him tell you what it was.
It's a good story. So it comes back to wanting to take risks, and so being lucky on my first film is just not asking myself too many questions and just taking a load of risks. And one of the risks was this one morning I told Tom, we're doing the scene where you start talking to yourself, and I had asked him to explore what he himself as a human being would be when he would be talking to himself, because I think we're all kind of different when we do that. And so, but then that one morning I said, Tom, tonight we're going to do the scene and what I'm going to do is I'm going to load a full mag of film, and we shot this on film, and we're all going to leave. I'm going to leave you alone in the snowplow with a camera and a full mag. The camera assistant started the camera, and we all left and hid in the forest, and we had no clue what he was doing alone. And it would only be a surprise the next day to know what he went through. So, take was over. It's like, hey, Tom, how was it? And he was like, good. I'm like, okay, well, we'll see tomorrow. I guess we'll reshoot if it sucks. But and then watching those 10 minutes of film was like a lesson, I guess, for any actor. It was great. The first 7 or 8 minutes is Tom just going off and being hilarious as he can be, and because again, this movie being a specific tone where some moments it's funny and some moments it's tragic, and so first 7 minutes are hilarious and he's just going on, and then there's like a whole minute and a half of total silence. I think it's between the 8th and the 9th minute, and he's just staring at himself, and then there's complete silence for a whole minute, and then that last minute, he just goes and breaks down and starts talking about the kids that the man he killed might have. And that's what's in the film. And so he kind of brought that onto the character. That specific line was not written. He invented it. So, yeah.
Yes.
Left alone with a camera, just started inventing shit. Right.
Yes, right here.
How cold was it actually when you were filming?
How cold was it when you were filming this movie?
Let me just tell you what they did. If it wasn't cold enough, they hired a guy that had these 2 huge fans and he was very proud to brag on the fact that they were both Corvette engines. And these fans would then get cranked up to like 60, 65 miles an hour. They were huge. They like 10-foot span, inside the cage. The guy was very proud. I would hear him speak in French every night, and the only word I understood was Corvette. and then they would have these boxes of cornstarch that they would throw into the back of these fans, and then it would at 65 miles an hour just get blasted, at me and at Marc Labreche. So when it wasn't cold enough, the fans got cranked up. But it was like I think one day it was 26 below.
Yeah.
The only problem I ever had, there was a scene early on when I'm walking in the blizzard and I lay down, and Manny wanted me to be so still that for a moment, you think I'm dead. And I did. I got some frostbite on my cheek, which we then had to incorporate because it took, little did I know, raised in South Texas, that it takes a very long time for frostbite to heal. It's got to keep not scarring, but it has to scab up and come off and scab up and come off. But it was incorporated into the makeup of the character because it happened very quickly too.
But he was a real trooper because he worked, and it was hard for him. But we were just talking over, we were just having a bite, and we were just talking about the first time I saw him was at the airport when and he was like, I can take this cold, and he shows up, I think he's dressed exactly the way he is there with cowboy boots and a hat, and he's got a little leather pouch, and he just comes down, hey, I'm ready for Canada, and it's like, Tom, I told you to buy a fucking coat. And so I had to take my coat off my back and give because when I picked him up at the airport.
Which is a Canadian Goose, if anybody's familiar with that brand. They're huge, You're immediately, Santa Claus, stupid brother.
But now you're ready for winter, this experience.
Yeah, I mean, since then I did a movie last summer in Winnipeg. Wasn't anything like that experience. It was like being in Kansas, walking around with no shirt on.
All right, some in the back, in the very back.
Yeah, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first one is, as far as the pacing between the scenes that, Tom was just doing on his own, and then the scenes with the other actors, and I believe it was Paul. How did you decide on the pacing of those and juxtaposing them to keep the movement of the movie going? And then the other question would be, once you have some recognition, how did you promote your film?
Okay, so there are two questions. One is about the pace of the movie, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the edit and how you found the rhythm of the film. And then the next question was about how do you go out and promote your movie?
Obviously, I think editing will answer most pacing issues most of the time. But I must say that we had a great script doctor that came into our writing process about a few months before we started to shoot, and she was really good at helping us play around with flashbacks, what we were feeding the audience as information, and what could work well, structurally, but also rhythmically. So a lot of that was written in kind of that order in terms of, again, what flashbacks in reality, but obviously the editing process was obviously just as fruitful, and a lot of those discoveries came through trial and error. I think trial and error is in the edited room is the one thing that'll get you some great answers. Music was something I was naive enough to think that this movie didn't need music. At first, I was like, we'll do it dry, and it was, and then when my editor decided to try some musical tracks, we explored a few different things, and when that started to stick, we realized that it could carry the moments that needed to be carried well, and then voiceover work I think also helped. Tom and I both agreed, I think, once the final cut was done, that we should try and see if maybe a bit of voiceover could be cool. And again, we wrote some lines, and Line Patch. Where were you? San Antonio? Mm-hmm. And Line Patch. We recorded all that in Montreal. And I don't know if that answers the question.
The best approach with music too is to have none and then add back in.
As far as promote, you asked a question about promoting.
Promoting and yeah.
Yeah, the movie, it played at Tribeca last year, and Manny won the award for Best First Feature, which he just recently, the Canadian Screen Awards, which in our arrogant American fashion, we always use everything self-referential, the Canadian Oscars. He won Best First Feature at the Canadian Oscars just recently. But as far as promoting it, he was in China. I've been to screenings of it, around, and here in Austin for the Austin Film Festival back in November, I think, and just various screenings here and there, or festivals here and there, and you just hope that, especially out of Tribeca, the movie actually got exceptional reviews, and now that it's coming out digitally today, there's been a bunch more reviews, and you just sort of hope that it'll catch a little bit of a breeze. Oscilloscope is a small company, but very specific in how they release movies, and the theatrical isn't a dead issue. They want to see how it does digitally for a period of time, and it came out in, was it February or January? It was released theatrically in Canada.
Yeah, but I think everything's, like Tom just answered, everything will be decided, I guess, on how it performs now on VOD, but the last
on iTunes and Netflix.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
iTunes and Netflix, right. But for me, the last 2 years have been a great festival run, and that's been the most fun, is just going from city to city and seeing how different audiences around the world either laugh, or the questions. It's all so different. It's very interesting. So that's been the cool part for me.
So we have time for one or two more, and I have seen this one in the back on the left.
more there.
Yeah, we'll get you guys. Yeah.
An aspect that I thought was really interesting was the passage of time in the story, basically from the crash going forward, because it doesn't really give you anything concrete to hold on to. And at first I thought this was all a couple of days, and then you start to realize it seems like even longer and longer, and then at the end it jumps and it jumps. And I was curious, where in the process you decided to have the passage of time like that. Was it more concrete in the script? Was it the way it is in the film in the script? And if you struggled with, how the audience would understand that.
Question is about the passage of time. Did you change it from the script to the edit? And what was your theory on how the audience would adapt to the way you're using time in the story?
That's a good. Actually, I've never had that. No one's ever asked that question. But in the script, we had what you often see in survival movies or movies with one person alone is clear identifications of times. So day 1, day 7, day 91, or whatever. And we actually had that on paper in one draft. And I think what we shot, we had taken it away. And just because we realized maybe we don't need it. But first edit, when we first cut it, we were like, oh my God, well, audiences actually understand. And so we brought it back in, and we had supers where we had day 1 and then whatever. And then the last shot of Tom alone, we had year 1 under him. And so it was, that year 1 brought out a laugh. When people saw year 1, when they see him at the end and he's there in year 1. And so it had a kind of a cleverness to that. But also we realized that it was to the advantage of the film to let audiences kind of get lost in the forest with him. And that passage of time be abstract for the audience as it was for the lead. So it was a decision in halfway through the editing process to let go of markers of time.
Great. There's another one right here. Yes.
There was a scene, and I guess it was right in the beginning after Bruce dumped Paul's body, and you're kind of back. And so I guess this is more of an editing or filming question, kind of more of the technique, and only because the mood it kind of provoked was when the snowplow is moving away and you're way back, and it just starts getting darker and darker and centered. And I guess I'm just curious about, was there a thought around that, as well as was there any special aspect of the filming or editing process that occurred in that shot?
So maybe talk about effects and also cinematography as it pertains to how you were sort of setting Thomas in the middle of his own crime.
And one specific shot you're talking about, right? Which is a shot I love, and a lot of people actually ask questions about that shot. And so we needed one shot. We knew we were going out in the storm because we were one night, we had a bit of snow coming down, and I put a B unit on standby. As soon as we had some real snow, we were like, okay, let's go and get it. That night we knew we needed a one specific shot of plow going away from camera, and we knew that we wanted it to fade out in the shot. But seeing as we couldn't follow that road because we didn't want to leave marks in it, we weren't sure where it was going to land. You understand? Because it would have been complicated we wouldn't have been able to erase all our tracks if we had scouted that road, so we had no clue where it was going. And I never thought it was going to be that long, and so that's why that was a beautiful surprise to us, was that it just kept on going and going and going, and we were screaming at the plow driver, keep driving, because Tom wasn't driving the plow that night. And so
that night was a little bit of a windfall for me, because I was supposed to work all night, and this storm came in and they changed everything, and I'd only been there for like an hour, and like, you can go home, we're gonna shoot the plow tonight. I'm like, okay, man, that's so that's what's significant for me, is like, I went back to the hotel and started
drinking,
watching Hangover 3.
It wasn't out yet.
Okay, there was one in the back that I wanted to get, and then I see you. We'll get you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
2 questions. One's kind of a throwaway. The first one is, as a viewer, I spent less than 90 minutes with that plow and still felt a connection to it. Was it hard leaving it? Where did the plow end up? And then the second question, which is for Thomas Hayden Church, it's kind of crazy that we have you here on a weekend that a new Spider-Man movie is opening up. So I was going to ask you, if you had the opportunity to do a DC movie, what character would you be?
Okay, 2 questions. We're going to start with your connection to the snowplow. Was it hard to leave the snowplow? It's hard for us to leave the snowplow. You guys talk about that.
It was actually. Well, the guy that Manny was just referring to, whose name I believe was also Andre, right? Yeah. There's a lot of Andres, let me tell you, in Quebec. They're the Billy Bobs of Quebec, you know. But I believe he owned that one, didn't he? Wasn't that
No,
his?
he was a city worker who was just.
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
But there was
the story's going nowhere.
I was maneuvering the plow, and the guy, I had to like go through like burying the body, and the guy just saw him like standing over there just shaking his head, and then I went over there, it's like, am I doing something wrong? He goes, no, you're just doing it very slow. And they're like, and they put him in it, and it was just, you know, like a butcher, you know, with 7 knives. I mean, the guy just whipped through it. But no, from an emotional, I actually did kind of become connected to it. It's a sad little machine. It's tiny, it's rusty, you know, it's so antiquated, the skid steer mechanism, but it really was, there were times when I would look at it, and it did have sort of a very kind of sad sack personality to it. Although, for the weirdest reason, it seemed female. I don't know why. I thought it was...
That was not in the script.
Yeah. I'm not
Follow-up
that familiar.
is what DC Comics
Yeah, I'm not
character
sure.
would you
I'm
like
not
to
even
play?
familiar. Is that like, those are the Batman and Superman? Yeah. All of those guys? You know, I wasn't a comic book guy, but I don't remember some of the more obscure ones, but I just like villains. You know, I'm always a fan of villains. Even though I always have kids come up to me all the time, like, you know, you're a villain in Spider-Man 3, but you're really a good guy. In the end, you loved your daughter. Spoiler alert! There you go. For those of you that haven't seen it.
Okay, we're going to take one more. This lady's here.
So I'm curious about the idea for the doll eyes. Like, was it intentional symbolism, like the wife is watching over him? And then also curious, did you have to get on the World Wide Web emails and 2.0 to do the price checking of the doll eyes?
Yes. Great questions. Okay, so the question is, let's talk a little bit about the doll eyes.
We debated the shit out of how much those eyes should cost. And here's why. We wanted to know what Paul's sort of snap financial assessment of Bruce was. And when he saw these eyes, and we talked about it, he was like, yeah, I got a bunch more in the basement. He's doing this quick calculation of my net worth, but, you know, translated through glass eyeballs. Yeah. The currency fluctuations of glass eyeballs. It was fun.
Yeah. So my follow-up will not be as funny. It's the serious part of the question would be, where did the idea come from? And it's the writer and I, we kept talking about tones. The one word we kept using was, what's in tone with the film? We needed something that was original, that was kind of weird, that was kind of and we were looking for it. And then obviously when the idea of, I think Mark told me he was driving back by a taxidermy, and he called me and he said, what about if they stuffed birds or something? And then that kind of shifted and went into dolls, and then when we got into the doll's eyes, then everything about the windows to the soul, and that all came, and all of a sudden it just all connected, and we thought, okay, it's that kind of thing where, yes, it does have that kind of deeper symbolism, and at the same time it's kind of just that weird, cool thing that you don't know why. And
That's great. Well, I have to thank you both so much for coming to Austin to present this wonderful film. And thank you to the audience for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next film.
Thanks, you guys were great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.